Hey everybody. Yeah, it looks like I'm on live. So hey everybody, glad to see you again today. Kind of a weird setup here. As you can tell, I got two cameras going on. I hope you can hear me all right because I had some audio difficulties, and right this minute the camera across the room is the one that's presenting right now. And I gotta get used to this right to go left kind of stuff with the cameras being flipped. But anyway, so I thought today I'd do something a little different, completely different, is just kind of talk about the flow of the startup, at least the startup journey I've been on for now almost, like, I started doing what I'm doing really specifically in 2016. So literally like mid July 2016 is when I started this whole journey. So from my perspective, that's kind of the start. So we're coming up on that. And I thought, well, hey, I'm almost 9 years in. Why don't I go through this? But I wanted to start today with this sort of fun thing of, this is studio number two. Okay. And the reason I have studio number two is because we're about to do some more renovations in the back of the building. And we really don't want like drywall dust and stuff to fill up the new space, because there's all this black foam on the walls in the other space. And so if we get a lot of white drywall dust on it, it's just going to be ugly. So we're going to have to seal off the studio for just a little bit, and then we can go back to using it more normally. But this is also kind of like our new, I'll call it live sell live selling experiment. We're messing around with live selling, and so this is kind of like the live selling storefront. So I'm going to drop the one camera off, and then I'm going to get into what I'm going to talk about. But I just thought you might think this is interesting, because this is a perfect example of my what my wife or my mom might have called barnyard carpentry. Okay, so this rig that's got the lights on it is a bunch of like steel pipe with screw into the thing that makes this whole rig work out. But I think overall it's worked out pretty well, and so we're still working on this. This is one a work in progress. But I really expect by the end of the summer that this whole little sub studio area that we use for live selling will probably continue, just because we're starting to get potential clients for the overall audio business we're doing in the other space. So it's kind of like I get to check in there and do things from time to time, but we're actually going to fill it up with clients, and so it's just a lot of fun what's going on here. So that I'm going to pick off the other camera just to go over to the other view we have here. So now what we have is we have kind of this main view of the speaker, and I still have to get used to where to stand on this. So we have the main view of the speaker, and then we have sort of a hands-on view where you can see what they're talking about. And so that's pretty fun, because it gives us the ability to really get close in on something, to demo it, to show people what's going on. And I thought today, if I'm going to talk about the flow of my startup, like how did I kind of go with flow to end up where I'm at? I thought it'd be just a fun little history tour and kind of give you examples of choices that get made or things that happen that you're like, oh, well, I guess I can. First thing I'm going to start out with is the original book one of the Towers of Light series, Darkness Cloaks the Land. Now, this book, with Light of Mine, the current title, but this was the very first book I put out, and this is sort of the flow state that caused this to occur. Was I was at a party, and a friend of ours was talking about how they were starting their music career. I thought, oh, well, that's kind of cool. You're, a little old to be starting a new career. I was a little old, like I was in my mid 40s at the time, and I thought, I'm not sure, whatever. But then I mentioned to another friend, hey, I got this book I've written. I haven't really done anything with it because it needs to be edited. And all of a sudden, my friend's like, oh, I'm an editor. I can edit. Now, what I didn't realize is she was an editor like in a business process or business editing format, right? And so that was cool. She wasn't really like a book editor, but I'm like grammar and that sort of stuff. I just didn't take those classes. I avoided literature classes, which is crazy because I'm a writer. But for whatever reason, high school, brain damage, whatever, I didn't do that. So this book came out of that. And part of the flow of that process was I got committed. Like I spent the summer, she was editing it, sending me stuff. I would read it and make my edits and got it all together. And then I went and I learned about Kindle Direct Publishing.
And this is just this great tool where you can take your book and you can throw it up there. And I got halfway through the process and I was like, oh, this is so easy and blah, blah, blah. And then I need a cover. Now, I hadn't really thought about a cover, quite frankly. It was like the last thing on my mind. I was trying to think about, like, you know, story stuff, and I really didn't know what I was doing. So in the flow, my son, who is a very creative person, said, hey, Dad, I'll make a cover for you. And so he went out and he looked through the family photos and tried to find something that showed the three kids in my family, because the three kids in the story are the three kids in the family. Showed the three kids in the family, and he found this really sweet photo of the three of them holding hands walking through the park. And then he made it all creepy, you know, like this, the darkness is cloaking the land here. Maybe I can get the angle a little bit better. But you can see, like, it looks like something serious is going on here. And if you turn it over, it's, you know, got my goofy mug and a few things on the back. But this was the very first version of this. And I think right now, as far as I know, this might be one of, well, I know this is like one of less than 100 physical copies that were ever made. And I think it might be less than 50. I'd have to go back and look at the physical copies that were made. So it's a very rare thing that this even exists. And in the end, the book was kind of garbage, to be honest. Like it had kind of a neat story wrinkle to it, but it was more like a comic book or a set of comic book, 2 or 3 comic books in an episode. It wasn't a novel. And in the flow, talking about the flow, I flowed into a lady at church who happens to be an accomplished writer, and she looked at it and she kind of threw up all over it. And she told me, no, Alan, this is not a book. She's like, I don't know what this is. It could be something. And so I got a lot of help with her and another person from church. And, you know, in that meeting, we ended up really coming up with, you know, oh, this is what I need to do to correct it. And that's when I really cranked down. And so one thing I would suggest, you know, in the flow, if you've decided, hey, I'm going to be a writer, it is good to like get actual training on how to do that. And so in the flow, I went and got some training, and I went to this writers conference and got some advice and did a lot of work. And in the end, I came up with version 2. And now this is version 2. Darkness cloaks the land. Now, I thought this was the bomb, right? I mean, now granted, we've got like, actually this cover is kind of funny. So these 3 kids are like kids from our homeschool co-op that were super, you know, the right ages for the story. And so they were great friends. The shield there is tinfoil over my son's, Nerf shield thing we had. And then that sword, we actually lit a sword on fire because that was fun. Like we went and I learned a whole bunch of stuff about how to put accelerants on a piece of metal and light it on fire. And so he's not actually holding a fiery sword, but my son, who was like 17, 18 at the time, and I were in the garage and we lit a sword on fire to make this effect. But that was all done in Microsoft Paint. Okay, so not great. Backside a little better. We had kind of this nice little image here. But again, just not really getting the job done as far as being a finished work. And so in the flow of this process, I met a gentleman who has become kind of I don't know if he's my hero, but he's just somebody that always holds me to a higher thing. So Scott Miner from the Realmakers Consortium, he just kind of laid it out. He said, look, your cover's not good enough, and I suspect the interior stuff is not as good as it needs to be a commercially viable thing. Right? Like that at the end of the day, for somebody to pick that up off the shelf and actually buy it, it needs to be better than it is. And so, and the other thing I had at the time, though, while I was trying to come up with that one, I also had the illustrated version of the book that young kid in the family knew helped me do. And I really enjoyed the art in this, but again, it just didn't have the spit and polish finish that you would expect from a finished work. So I was like, all right, I took the feedback. And so I think one of the big things about flow is if you find yourself in the flow of doing stuff and your startup's going along, when you get like pointed feedback from someone who genuinely seems to have your best interest at heart, right? Like, so along the way, I ran into like an acquisitions editor for a company, and she was just kind of like, look, you need to just take a break. Like, you're really excited about your work because it's your work, but it's not the way you're presenting yourself, the way you're presenting the work, it's not commercially viable for like middle grade. That essentially that, parents that would buy my kind of stuff are not going to be attracted to it for a lot of different reasons. And she kind of told me essentially like go home, like set this aside for a little bit, go home and rethink your life. It's pretty much what she said. And on the one hand, I like my feelings were kind of hurt by that. But on the other hand, I talked to some good people. Lauren Brandenburg was just great in helping me like work through the sort of emotional trauma of your stuff is bad, go home and rethink your life. But in the flow of that, I was like, okay, I am just going to take this advice. What's it going to hurt if I just sit on it for a few months, right? Like in the flow. And what if I just do something different that's super fun and maybe my brain will rework? And so I did that. I did exactly that. I took a step back and wrote this whole different thing that I don't know that it'll ever see the light of day, but it's about a bounty hunter in the future that I wrote that I thought would be a lot of fun. It's fat guys can be heroes if there's no running involved, things like that. Like it's just a funny thing, me being a big guy, I can kind of make that joke. But anyway, long and the short of it is I can't figure out how to move that hair that's bugging me. Anyway, long and the short of it is I took a break. And when I came back, I made a team. I got a team. And my team did a really good job for me putting together what was Light of Mine. Or what is Light of Mine, quite frankly. It's the same book. It's the anchor of the Towers of Light series. And this book is, from my perspective, it's a huge labor of love, and it's not done yet, quite frankly. And that I think that's the tricky part is commercially, when you write a book, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to keep revising it after a period of time. It just doesn't work. However, I am coming up on the 10th anniversary. So I think I can just squeeze a little bit more in it because 10 years later, I know better how to do some stuff. So there will be like a new edition, but it won't change drastically. Not like the way it changed between the first and the second and now the third iteration. And so this book, as it was in the third iteration, I was really considering trying to, I had done everything independent up to this point, and I was really considering trying to see if I could find an actual publisher that would take it because it was in great shape, right? The front looks awesome. The text is good. It's a great story. Reviewers like it, that kind of stuff. It was pretty fun. But it had also kind of been ruined, right? So if you self-publish and put something out in the market, if you go with the flow and you just push the button, you may be in a position where you've kind of hurt the commercial viability of your project permanently because nobody, no editor, nobody wants to deal with kind of damaged goods or something that's already been launched. They don't want to be a relauncher, so to speak. That's not their business model. And so the only way they really want to pick it up is if you've already shown you can sell thousands of copies, and at which point, do you really need the publisher? That's another question. But in the flow, right, I'd met some good people, I got some great ideas, and I was really on it. I was going to move this forward. And then somebody said, well, this would be a great thing for like Christian homeschoolers. You ought to have some curriculum. And so in the flow, I was like, I ought to have some curriculum. Okay, that would be interesting. And so a language arts curriculum is just, like comprehension questions and vocabulary and memory work and critical thinking, those kind of things. Not necessarily an actual grammar class. That's sort of a separate thing. But people like my understanding is homeschool moms like a unit study, something that gets them out of the flow of what they were doing to do something a little different. So anyway, with that in mind, we ended up putting out the unit study. Okay, so now I have the book and the unit study, and I'm trying to promote this thing. And one of the things in the flow of all of this that really became apparent was it was good and it was cool, but it wasn't necessarily terribly unique in the market. Yes, it is prairie punk, like Little House on the Prairie meets Narnia, right? Like there's some magical kinds of things. It's not even magic, really. It's more, spiritual kinds of things. There's spiritual kinds of things that cause the armor of God to appear and stuff like that on the prairie. So it's fantasy set in the prairie, 1860s. That's unique, but it really wasn't, it wasn't that big. And then in the midst of kind of all these plans, disaster struck. I had the whole second and third book. Well, The last part of the second book and 80% of the third book were handwritten in a notebook that I left in an airplane seat and walked off the plane. And you know what? When you walk off the plane, they don't let you walk back on. No, no, not going to do it. And on top of it, when I asked, try to say, hey, did you find anything, whatever, nobody would cop to finding anything. So I lost the manuscript. And that delayed everything, right? Like it really put me back. On the one, well, I say that on the one hand, it delayed it. On the other hand, it really sort of changed the scope and tenor of some of the story, like in a good way. So it wasn't entirely bad, but it was one of these things from a flow perspective, like that was a disaster, right? Like you lose your actual work product that you've got like a good, I think I'd probably had 6 months of handwriting in that, like flying on planes back and forth between places at the time. And it was just like, ugh. But you just kind of get up and you go, okay, I guess I need to figure out how to do this. And so one of the things about recovering the flow in that is I actually went and bought a like device. I bought a little tablet that would work for me in my big size in coach on an airplane, which was the whole thing. Like getting the right piece of gear. I was talking about the right gear. That was an important piece. So anyway, after that part happened, then it was the kind of thing, well, I got to move. And so I ended up releasing these 2 books in the same year. And the crazy thing about that was, I'll do this first. So Still Small Voice got released in the summer of 2020. And I don't know if you remember 2020, but we were on lockdown in 2020. And so that really messed up the whole thing. Like the launch of that book was just kind of dismal and sad. That's the only way to describe it. But I had already planned to launch this book, Fear No Evil. And so it happened. Like it happened in the middle of the COVID lockdowns. Like the first one, there wasn't really anything I could do. What was planned around the launch and all that was just done. The second one, it was like, should I even do it, right? Should I even try to launch it? And so, but I had a friend who had a business and he was like, well, if you want to try to like put it, I have some kids that do come in and out of here or whatever. If you want to try to do something with that, go ahead. So I ended up doing a curbside launch for this book. I sat outside in the cold in November signing books. I sold like 3 things. I sold 3 books and 2 of them went to a good friend of mine that just felt bad for me. But the whole point of that was from a flow perspective, like sometimes you just gotta work with what you got, and sometimes it's just not gonna work out. And so anyway, Fear No Evil came out. Now, what's really interesting about this from a bigger picture, I do this to help parents reinforce Christian values, and the value behind this is courage, right? That's the value behind Fear No Evil. And at the time, everyone was isolated. This was COVID in the middle of it. And this book comes out, and the book is about 3 kids that are lost and alone in a valley of darkness. And they have to pray for the courage to fear no evil. So the timing was perfect, despite me losing it and having to recreate it and then rush it to market the way I did to catch up, so to speak. It ended up being the right book at the right time. And I got that feedback from people. Like they were like, I really appreciate that my kids got this right now. It was good for discussion and things like that. So anyway, as this is coming out, the other thing that's going on, and this I talk about sort of the divine appointments. The next thing that happened to me was I was like, hey, this curriculum idea is kind of working. I've got these books, but my own kids had challenges reading. So while they're trying to learn how to read, it was really difficult, and they had to read while listening. They had to hear the books while they followed along. And so I thought, well, is there a way I could do that? Could I get audio books to go with my physical books? And then go forth and, kind of in the flow. I've got audiobooks, I got physical books. You can read while listening. That'll help kids learn how to read. That was a great idea, but it's like, well, but buying the books online is not cheap, right? Like at the time, my books were running about $20 on audible.com. So they weren't cheap. They weren't something that was easily affordable for a homeschool family. And so I wanted to come up with something better. And I had this wild idea. Well, why don't I make my own audiobook players? I was like, I could go source them from, AliExpress or something. I could put the MP3 players and I could sell them. And there you go. I could bring the cost way down. I was basically the first iteration of it. I think I could sell you the audiobook player with 2 books on it. and make my margins and everything for like $25, which one audiobook was costing $20 without the player. So it was a good deal and it kind of worked, but manufacturing the devices and dealing with all that, I just wasn't in a place to do it. And so I was trying to find something different. And I ended up at the Christian Products Expo. This is a place where if you got a product that goes to the Christian market and you want to see it get into a bookstore, you might go to this event. And I ran into a gentleman by the name of Daryl from Mega Voice Audio Bibles. And Daryl introduced me to this little guy, the Pathway Audio Player. If I can get it out of the bag. And this thing is pretty cool. So the Pathway Player is super rugged. These are designed to go anywhere in the world. They've been all over the world with the Bible on it. But they also, in some cases, have like kids' Bible stories or other stories that ministries put out. But they're super economical. Like they fit my price point. In other words, I can't hit the $25, but technically I can take the first 3 books in my series, put them on this device and sell the 3 books for $37.45, which plus some other content, and net it out. That's less than $10 a book when you add all the content that's on there together. That's a great deal. Like you can't get a deal as good as that. And it's compact and it's not a screen. And so that was one of the things about, I said Devine Appointments is part of this. Like I couldn't have set up the meeting if I wanted to. Like there's no way I could have in any way known that I was going to end up talking to Daryl or that this was going to be a thing. And then on top of it, that I would find exactly the device I wanted because they manufacture them, they package them, they do all this stuff. The devices are warranted, so they could handle any broken devices. It's just a perfect thing. And so immediately we went from that to kind of the next level of, okay, so that's a small player. It doesn't hold the whole series. And so then we upgraded to a more advanced player. And then along the way, we ended up in a conversation about, well, Mega Voice tends to sell business to business to other, ministries, basically. Globally, people that want to get the Bible into people's ears, that this is how they do it. And so they have this kind of standard device, the Envoy 2S, which is sort of their stock device. It's something that's used all over the world, and it's solar powered, which makes it really, really pretty interesting. And so they were like, hey, is there any way, you seem to know what you're doing selling things, like retail selling things. Is there any way you could help us with, other stuff like Amazon.com or other things? And so I said, sure. And I sat down one day and in the process of meeting with them, they had a vague notion of what they wanted. And I was like, well, actually, I know quite a bit about Amazon just because of what I was doing with KDP. And I'd done a lot of research on selling there and kind of knew the market of how things worked. And I looked and there was kind of a hole. There was a place for their product there, but there really wasn't anybody to do it. And so I wrote up this whole plan. It had, Amazon as a selling place. It had various distributors. It had individual retailers. It was an extensive go-to-market strategy based on, the total addressable market and all this sort of stuff. And in retrospect, I'm like, well, that's what I do professionally, like outside of this Towers of Light stuff is go-to-market strategy. That's just what I do. So when I say Devine Appointments, that's just a skill set I have. They wanted to do a thing. I wrote this up and I kind of thought, well, they would do it, right? Like, it's like, here's your strategy. If you want to go forth and do this. And then it was like, well, do they need to do it or could I do it? Like, do I have the capital to make this work? And so then it just sort of turned into this thing where, yes, I did this and I kept writing my books. I ended up putting out the next 3 in the series over a series of years. And the Mega Voice thing took 2 years to kind of really become a thing. And in the process, Armor of God came out, and then Wellspring of Life, and then Demolishing the Stronghold. And so I had all 6 books. And then I wanted a player for kids stuff. And we had this whole idea. We were going to go do this thing, and we were really moving forward. We're going to sell this stuff on Amazon. It's going to be a big thing. And then we ran into this thing called child safety. Now, Mega Voice had done some stuff for child safety for specifically this pathway model. They had it certified and it was good and it was something that would work. But for the bigger model, we needed to put the other stuff on. The Solar Plus is what I'm calling it now. It needed to be safety certified. And so it turned into this whole thing where we had this whole go-to-market plan. We get going, and then Amazon's like, no, you can't sell this. So the net of this is we work through the things, and now everything's certified and it's fine. But it's one of those things talking about working through challenges and whatnot. Even when you have a divine appointment, doesn't mean that you don't have to make sure you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's. I think there's a story Jesus talks about in the New Testament about you've got to count the cost of building your tower before you get started, so you don't get halfway up and run out of money, kind of thing. And so this specific thing about the certifications was just something that even though in some cases we had all of what appeared to be the right documentation, but then Amazon wanted to take it to another level. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, in the end, you want to have safe things, but like just getting the paperwork, it wasn't that it wasn't certifiable. It was just a matter of, oh, we had half the certification, but we needed another half and things like that. So anyway, as we went along, then a lot of other stuff came up. One of the big things that I was proud about in the certifications thing was we have Meow Meow. And so he's a key character. I'll have him look up at the screen. Hey, everybody. Or maybe there. That's not quite as weird. Anyway, Meow Meow, how's it going? He's a key character in the story, and he's based on my daughter's stuffed animal, Meow Meow. We made him, and he can have our player in it, and that's pretty cool. But probably my favorite thing that came out of those divine appointments and stuff we did is the Tower of Light audiobook player. Now, this is another one of those things. We're just flowing along one day. I'm on a call with Daryl talking about, I don't remember what it was. We were just talking about something, and he pulls this out and shows it to me, right? And he turns the light on, and I'm like, how big is that thing? And it just so happens that this thing is like Lego guy size. Like it's the perfect size to set down next to a bunch of Legos and build a whole house around it. And I'm like, that is a Tower of Light for Legos. And so anyway, that has now turned into its own product and its own thing. And I think, from a flow perspective, this is one of those things where you're in a meeting, you're talking collaborative, and it's like, well, how do we make that happen? And so we've done a lot of work to make that go. And along the way, we've done a lot of different things, right? As the flow has come up, I've collaborated with different people. One of the big things in our whole homeschool thing, we have our curriculum, like a full set now of a curriculum workbook for every book in the series, which is pretty cool. But not everybody's like a homeschooler. So I was able to repurpose that into an activity book. And so you got the ability to if you're not really doing school, but you want to do the activities that are in there, that's great. A lot of repurposing goes along as you're going along the flow. You get customers that ask you for things. And it's like, well, how, I might not be able to do it today, but how can I do that? And so a lot of that has happened. But one of my favorite things that happened along the way was reading while listening is a big deal to me. And I really want kids to be able to read the Bible, and how do you get them started, and how do you get them motivated? And so this collaboration was really awesome. So the Good and Evil Ultimate Comic Action Bible has their audio available via Mega Voice devices like these. And so I was like, hey, can I get that audio? And we've got a licensing agreement where I can get the audio, I can put it on players, and now kids can hear the story and read the comic at the same time and build that reading skill. And I think that's awesome. I've also been able to collaborate with a lot of other authors along the way and get their audio onto devices. And so we've got this really fun one, Lambda's Journey with Jesus, that we've got a little lamb, right? And we can put him in a backpack, got this really cool little backpack for Lambda's story. And we've got the pocket voice device that's just the right size to tell Lambda's story. And that's, a book from another author. But again, it's that reading while listening is kind of the whole shtick. I want kids to be able to hear while they follow along. And it's one of those things where you just never know what's going to happen. I had another collaborator, Susan, I'm losing her name. Susan Marlowe's Circle C series. She was able to partner with me to make some audio devices. And that's really it with the flow, is that as you run into stuff, you just have to kind of go, is this something that's going to work? Especially when you're starting, because you just don't know. If you look at YouTube and a lot of these big apps, Slack, etc., when they started, they had a very different idea about what they were going to do when they finished. And now, here I am 9 years in, and I got stuffed animals, right? Like Rascal Raccoon was totally not on my agenda because we didn't have a stuffy called Rascal in our house. But as I'm writing this book with my buddy Logan, um, I thought it should be a squirrel, but Logan wanted it to be a raccoon. So we end up this fall, we're going to have Logan stories on one of these players, um, with Meow Meow story and all this sort of stuff. And we're going to end up having that all together. And that's just kind of the flow of how things work. Is sometimes you get something that works. And I think in the end, the really tricky part though is as you have these opportunities, not all opportunities are equal. And I think the big thing I would say, if I could go back and do maybe a little more analysis on some of the opportunities, is take a longer look at the business model that would be applied to the thing ongoing to see if it has potential to make money. And what I mean by that is some of these side things I've done, while on the surface the thing itself might make money, it's not necessarily going to bring people back to your brand. It's not necessarily going to create a virtuous cycle of additional revenue. And so one of the things that I've been really evaluating is if I'm going to take on a new thing, right? And so we took on some new stuff this year, right? Like we did take on Meow Meow Milks the Cow, and along with Logan, these are net new series, net new things in the portfolio, right? Like when we took these on, they were actually very intentionally about lifetime value, because it's the kind of thing, if your 3 or 4 year old really likes my storytelling in Meow Meow Milks the Cow, then maybe when they're 6 or 7 and they want to read a book, they're going to pick up Logan. And then, when they get a little bit older, they might want to pick up this. And then, they get a little bit older, maybe they want their first MP3 player, they can pick up this. And so from that perspective, that's really kind of the change in the way I'm approaching flow is this thing like a fun thing or new thing or thing that's gonna that I just want to do? Because as an entrepreneur, part of your problem is you just want to do things, right? You might be bored today, so you decide to pick up a new project and go, oh, we're going to start this, because you're just bored with what you're doing. But at the end of the day, it's really more about if you want a sustainable business model, if you want something that can actually keep making you money over and over again, it really all needs to come together. Those divine appointments need to turn into thoughtful consideration about the next step. And as you thoughtfully consider the tower you're building, you're making sure that everything you're building is building upon itself to actually get you a foundation that moves up. Because all the other little things that you might want to try are keeping you from actually climbing the mountain of success. And it's been really interesting in the last few weeks. I'd say in the last 6 weeks. Now, granted, if you know anything about me personally, this year has just been I told people my year has been like a dumpster fire in the middle of a hurricane, right? Like just really horrible personal stuff's happened this year. But it did, like when most of that kind of fell down and I took a couple weeks off, I got some clarity on you really have to buckle down and make sure that you're doing kind of one thing a week that you're making it really good. And that one thing might only be the next step in the sales cycle until you get an actual end-to-end model that's running consistently, that's building sort of ongoing pipeline and all that sort of stuff. And as much as I want to try new things, as much as I want to let the flow, these new opportunities come up, I really do have to take a step back and go, is that really in the flow? Is it building, is it taking me down the river that's going to get me to this kind of successful business that's self-sustaining, that handles itself? Or is it really going to take me down a side tributary where I have to burn a bunch of cash to get back on the main flow? And I think that's the really tricky part about being an entrepreneur, is taking the time to assess, very often going back around and saying, okay, is the stuff I'm prioritizing right now actually keeping me in the main flow, or is it sending me off this tributary, even though it feels like a flow, but it's sending me away from the core, away from what I do, and then I'm gonna have to burn cash to get back? Because I think that's really the tricky part. Is it is so easy to burn cash in a startup. I had no idea. How easily it is to turn on the cash flamethrower. But really, as you think about it, as you're going through this process of, take on the flow, enjoy these, sweet moments where you meet new friends and you make new business partners for a lifetime. Like those are really awesome moments and you should embrace them. but at the same time, they should all be driving towards the same purpose of your purpose, right? Like at the end of the day, I'm really about equipping families, in their faith journey. And so everything has to kind of tie back to that somehow, and in a way that's actually, not because I'm intending to be the richest person in the world off this or anything, but it's got to be in a way that actually, puts food on the table, keeps my employees employed and things like that. So anyway, I hope this was kind of interesting and helpful to you to understand kind of the flow of what happened at Towers of Light and how we got where we are. And it kind of gives you a picture of where we're at now. We've got all of this neat stuff. And I think, one of the other neat things we have are these silver and gold players. I kind of forgot to mention that was I got some merchandising advice that said you really need 3. For anything you have, you should have 3 versions of it: small, medium, large, low, medium, tall, high, medium, low. And in our case, we went with gold, silver, and black, basically, right? We've got these 3 different models that are kind of the core of the business on the audio Bible side and the stuff for grownups. And so, this was another thing that kind of came out of the flow was how do we get there? And it's turned out to work really well. People really like the optionality, and there's other features that come with these. And so it's a really neat thing that came along that I didn't set out that way. Nothing I've done here was like, if I go back, I think about the only thing I can go back 9 years ago and say for sure that I knew I was headed towards was finishing the book series. But even that didn't turn out the way I thought, because the way I had the book series written originally, it was going to be 7 books. And then as I talked to people, they said, no, you can only have 3. And publishers don't want more than 3. And then it was like, well, I can never tell this story in 3, so I'm going to do 5. And I got to the end of book 4. And if you've read book 4, the end of that is shocking. And, as a reader, I'm sure it's just absolutely shocking what happens. But it was more shocking for me because I'm the one that wrote it, and I did not intend for that to happen. And so the 5th book in the series, talking about flow again, the 5th book in the series wasn't even like a book I expected to have. Like, this whole storyline wasn't there. I hadn't thought of it, wasn't in the outline, wasn't a thing, but it turned into a thing. And so in the end, I ended up with 6 books. So I'd say if I go back 9 years ago, even though I said I'll finish the series, I didn't know this is where it was going to end. So anyway, or that I would have a studio office or be having this conversation with you right now. So anyway, I hope this was interesting. I hope, you might have learned a little bit about Towers of Light, but I also hope you might have learned something about how to manage the flow in your own business, that on the one hand, it's great to embrace those things, but on the other hand, it all needs to be going towards a broader purpose that you can kind of tick some numbers to and say, yes, this does drive the broader purpose, and it's going to have an impact for the long haul. So anyway, have a great day. I'll talk to you later.